right, so welcome everyone. I'm really excited for today's conversation. Today I'm joined by Drew Cifrodelli he is the founder of Zweet Zpot Real Estate. Drew has built a reputation around identifying undervalued opportunities and approaching real estate investment with a creative structure lens, not just chasing deals, but engineering outcomes. I'm excited to unpack how the mindset translates into rethinking traditional bidding and project acquisition. Drew, thanks for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, let's dig in. So you built Zweet Zpot around finding opportunities where others may overlook it. When did you start questioning traditional bidding models, and what triggered that shift for you?
So I would go out and I would take buyers around looking at properties. And, when you have a buyer who's stretching themselves thin, they want to look at a lot of houses because they want to make sure they don't miss the one. And so in the process of doing that, you go out and you look at a lot of distressed properties, and they're not always labeled as distress in the MLS. So the buyers don't pick up on it. If I'm not careful, I end up going out and showing the properties to them, and they can't buy them for whatever reason. They're under distress, and they can't get a CO. There's mold. There's an underground storage tank. I mean, any number of things could be wrong with the house that would stop a leverage buyer from being able to get a mortgage on one of these properties, and therefore they're basically a cash only purchase. And then, of course, that lends itself to an investor. So I was going out showing these houses and realizing, all right, well, I'm out here showing these houses anyway. These are opportunities for investors to be buying these. My buyer can't buy them. So it was a good use of my time, basically, to analyze those properties on the side, not for the purposes of the buyer that I was out showing it to, but because these were potential opportunities for investors. So I decided I really had to have a strict model that I could run through to evaluate them. What would be their after repair value, right? And is there enough difference between the asking price and what the after repair value would be to make it worthwhile for an investor to buy it? And so that brings into the fold, okay, what are the different types of buyers, right? So an A1 best buyer is somebody whose house is sold. They're going to have no place to live in about 6 weeks because their closing is coming. They are flush with cash from the sale of their old house. They have, ideally, from a seller's point of view, they have children, and their children are already in the school system, so they're not moving out of that school system. And they can't enroll their kids in school unless they live in a home. So generally, they have the maximum amount of pressure, the most money to put down, typically. And they've already owned a house, so they know what it's like to own a house. They're not going to be giving you a hard time about inspection issues. So that's your A1 best buyer. So if you can look at that and say, all right, well, what would the A1 best buyer pay for this house if it was livable? And then what would it take to get it to that? All right, do you have to spend 40 grand to get it to livable condition? And then, carrying costs, take that into consideration, closing costs on both buying and selling, take that into consideration. And then you end up with a maximum allowable offer, right? So I had started out with a spreadsheet that would do this. I would punch the numbers in, estimate the costs, and come up with a maximum allowable offer, and then go out to my investors and say, hey, I came across this property while I was out doing showings. This is the number that I think would work. You could sell it for this much. If you could get them to accept an offer at this much, you might have an opportunity to make some money. And what I found was that the investors that listened to me were making money, and became regular investors with me because they were like, okay, I've done a couple on my own, they said, and I didn't make money on the ones that I did. But when I started doing it according to your model, I started making money.
Awesome.
So I've got, a few people that will attest to that for me. In fact, if anybody wants to get a testimonial, I'll be glad to share. And so that's how I came up with this idea. And then I started to think, well, now with AI, why am I waiting to go out to look at these properties? Why are I searching through the database, trying to find them actively, right? Going out and looking at them and comparing them to houses that have sold for market value and trying to surface potential deals, you know, um, without ever leaving my desk.
Right.
So, so that's where I'm at with my business. And
So you started using AI for that particular.
yes, yes.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So when I think about how most real estate construction or development projects get won, it's often lowest bid, speed, or relationship. How are you thinking about bidding differently? What variables do you believe most firms misunderstand?
Interesting. So, in my experience, estimating what the after repair value is going to be is a big factor, because a lot of investors want to go for setting a new high price. They let their ego kind of get in the way of making money. So if you look at any given market, and I have this curve behind me here,
Mm-hmm.
most of the buyers are within 2 standard deviations of the mean. So if you put a house on the market that's somewhere in between those 2 standard deviations, you've got somewhere around 50% of the market that it can afford to buy your house. So if you do the opposite of that, which is to over improve it so that you have to be down here on this end of the curve, you only have the buyers out here on the tail end who can afford your house. So now you're dealing with, very picky buyers who are, looking for, like they're the 5% or 3%ers. So I don't see that as a really good business model. That's high risk. So I try to encourage my investors to stay closer to the mean with the improvements that they're going to do to the property. And that way they're not outpricing the market. And if they can really keep their specs in line and their ego out of it, they can put a house on the market pretty quickly that meets basic requirements of housing for the market that they're in. It speeds up the timeline. It lowers the innovations. It lowers the expertise of the people you're hiring, because you're not really taking on big projects that require um, really really high skill. Right? You're still decently skilled labor, but not really high skilled labor. And
Mm-hmm.
and then the turnaround time being that I try to look at things that you can get done within 4 weeks. So even if you overrun your 4 weeks, you're still only at 6 weeks, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And at least at that point, you also have eliminated another risk factor, which is the market changes quickly.
Yeah.
So, right, if you take on a project that's going to take you 6 months, can anybody guess what the market's going to be like 6 months from now? You know, we could be in war,
Yeah.
which is right.
Yeah.
You never know, like what's going to happen
Reality.
in the economy, right? Different things happen, right? We're not in control of our government, so
Right.
things happen like that. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that happens. You just never know. So, I like to keep the risk down to a project that I can get done in 4 to 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, keep the complexity of the project small so that we're not going out for permits. We're not doing anything crazy like that unless we run into something that's like a little bit of a gotcha, like, oh, geez, the furnace broke while we were working on it, while we were working on other things. Then, sometimes you have to get a permit. And also the focus is on cosmetic. So even if we knew the furnace was broken, we wouldn't necessarily fix the furnace until we fixed all the cosmetic stuff, got the house on the market, because we can fix the furnace anytime.
Right.
Right. But the cosmetic stuff is the stuff that the buyers look at. They expect the furnace to work. We can promise it's going to work. We can even promise to install a new one. We disclose everything, so we're not hiding anything.
Hmm.
but people want to live in a nice house. So we do the cosmetic stuff first, get that done really fast, get the property on the market right away. And that way we also shorten the timeline to closing. So we are now reducing the carrying cost as well as the repair cost, and we're reducing the risk. So those three things will make you money every day.
So that leads into the next question. So on your site and LinkedIn, there's a consistent through line of intentional structuring, not just buying assets, but designing leverage in the deal. When you approach a project or a partnership, what are you optimizing for beyond price? Is it control, timeline, long-term long-term upside, or reputation?
Well, I think I kind of spoke to that already in those last 3
Mm-hmm.
points. So you're definitely doing timeline. You're reducing your risk by doing that. You're reducing the complexity. You're optimizing for price, of course, but you're not trying to get the highest dollar amount per square foot. You're literally trying to optimize. And that's why I say I have a value optimization system, because it's not price optimization, it's value optimization, which means you're getting more return on your investment, um, as an investor. So, did I
Got it.
answer that question?
You did. You did.
Or,
So, traditional bidding often compresses margin and increases execution pressure. How do you think about risk in competitive environments? And what's been most surprising about how risk actually plays out versus how people perceive it?
all right. So go back early in my career here, right?
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that surprised me was how many cash buyers there are. Uh,
Wow. Yeah.
right. So you will hear in the news, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, price houses are, dropping, there's great deals out there. Well, there's great deals out there if you have cash, right? If you don't have
True.
cash, you're paying full market.
Yeah.
And so at the times when things go south, people with money hold on to their homes, and people who have to sell. So what you get in bad markets is distressed properties. And that creates an opportunity for investors. So if you're an investor and they're saying that it's a bad time to sell your house, well, that's when you want to go buy. Well, not very many people have cash laying around to buy. So they come into the market thinking, all right, I'll go out and I'll buy a house now since the market's so bad. And they try to buy it with leverage.
Mm.
And then they go out and they find out, oh, there's 30 houses on the market, but I can only buy 2 of them with a mortgage. So that was a big surprise to me. And so, then you have to be creative, and you have to come up with other types of loans, whether it's hard money loan or a DSCR loan where if you can't rent it or it's not rented already, you're not going to get a DSCR loan. So then you're looking at a hard money loan, and hard money loans are expensive. So that means you got to get the price down even cheaper.
Hmm.
And when you're competing with cash buyers, are you going to get it cheaper than a cash buyer? Not easily, right?
Yeah.
So I think that answers your question, right?
It does. It does. All right. So that moves into the next question. Kind of flowing. So client slash internal alignment. When you take a non-traditional approach, there's usually some education required, whether that's investors, partners, or municipalities. What's been most effective in getting stakeholders aligned around a smarter, not just cheaper path forward?
Yeah. So usually it takes one win, to be honest with you. Like,
Interesting.
some somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm not sure. I don't know if this is going to work. And then, they trust me once and we do it. And they're like, wow, you know, that was great. And then the problem becomes for me, how can I find them more deals? Um, and that's not easy. So that's where I came up with this system of looking through the database, trying to find more deals, because honestly, that becomes the bottleneck.
Yeah.
I'll have them come to me and say, all right, I want to do 2 of those a month. And I'm like, yeah, if I could find 2 a month for you, that'd be great. you know, they're just not around. And when you have, your construction guys are going to travel just so far, right? So you got to work within the constraints of the manpower that you have and the people that you trust. If you try to start to go, to other states or to other counties that are outside of your area and more than an hour away, and you got to manage this project, well, now all of a sudden you have to have a project manager. So the costs just pile up.
Yeah.
And that means you got to keep buying it for less and less. And, the reality is that just aren't that, at least in New Jersey, there just aren't that many deals around because we've got so many cash buyers that you're not going to just find a deal lying around with nobody buying it. There's always
Right.
other bidders. And that's where they say like all real estate is local.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that you could go to remote areas of Ohio? I mean, sometimes people bring up Ohio to me, like it comes up often. I don't, never been to Ohio or those sections of Ohio. So I don't really know how bad it is. I mean, I've seen houses for sale there that are so cheap that it just is amazing to me,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't imagine making
Right.
money. So, yeah,
Yeah. And Ohio, it's not like neighboring state either, so
right.
not it's not as close. So yeah. So when it comes to signaling and metrics, so short to midterm, what signals are you paying attention to right now that tell you your strategy is working? Is it deal flow quality, speed of close, investor appetite, or something else?
So what will happen is when I finally give enough deals to my investors that they're busy now and they don't have any more capital. So then I end up with the opposite end of the problem. Okay, I'm
Mm.
finding deals and I can't find buyers anymore, at least out of my pool, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then I have to come into, all right, how am I going to find more investors if I've got good deals and they're all their capital is tied up, So it's a ebb and flow kind of a thing. So sometimes you're hunting for good deals, sometimes you're hunting for more investors.
Got it.
And so when I finally get to the point where I'm hunting for more investors because I have more deals than buyers, then those are the key indicators for me. Um, I guess before that, I would say, how many deals am I finding? I can kind of look at how many are, how many the system is generating for me.
Mm-hmm.
Are the spreads big enough? Is there compression in the spreads to the point where it's too hard to find deals where the numbers work? That's another leading indicator.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So moving on to market evolution. So the construction, real estate, and development landscape is tightening. Capital costs, labor volatility, regulatory shifts. Where do you think traditional bidding models break first under pressure?
Traditional bidding models. Well, I'm assuming that when you say traditional bidding models, you had mentioned the ones that I see are
Mm-hmm.
typically when a house goes on the market. If there are multiple bids, the seller will eventually, or the listing agent will eventually say, okay, we have a multiple bid situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Please get your best offer on the table by Friday at 5 o'clock, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a pretty traditional bidding situation in the market. If a house is priced properly, you'll see that kind of stuff all the time. You know? Um, and if it's overpriced, then they generally speaking don't get offers at all. So that's been another interesting part of the model that I'm finding I had to build in is I'm actually looking for overpriced houses because if they're priced right, there's competitive bidding and I'm probably not going to win the bid. If they're overpriced, then, and I can figure out what the right price is, I might be the only bidder.
Right.
So that's, I think, the biggest thing that I took away from this because the system is so powerful. Once it goes into the MLS, um, it creates competition if the price is right. Finding properties that are not on the MLS and trying to kind of take advantage of the people because they don't know what their property is worth. That doesn't sit real well with me, especially since as a broker, I have a fiduciary responsibility. When I meet somebody, if I say, hey, I'm going to be your listing agent and I'm going to get you the most money for your house, for me to turn around and pass that off to a pocket buyer for pennies on the dollar is wrong. So I don't do that. You know, my job is to get them the most money possible for their property. So I'm going to list the property and get them top dollar for it if that's the way that I approach them. On the flip side, if I go to them and I disclose that I'm a buyer, I'm an investor myself, and I'm going to buy their property, and then I can offer them pennies on the dollar for an off-market property. But I always also show them, if you let me market your property, I'm going to be able to get you this much. I can give you cash today, this much, but if you actually hire me to market your property, you know, you're not going to be leaving money on the table. So I try to be very ethical and upfront about it. There have been a few occasions where somebody has said to me, I don't want to put it on the MLS and I've got a valid reason for it. They've shared their reason for not doing it. It made sense. And I was like, okay, here's the money. Yeah. It doesn't happen very often. Most people, once they see how much money they can make by actually marketing the property, you know, they market it.
All right. So, another question I have for you, given that you've been doing this in your space for over 41 plus years, looking back, what's the biggest experience or lesson that stands out to you, or the biggest win?
So I came out of a technical background, right? I was a data analyst for 20 years. And when you're in the software business, you get a lot of salespeople who come to you and they make promises and they don't really know much about what they're selling, because software is kind of a nebulous thing. You know, until you actually buy it and try to use it, you're not really sure what you're buying. And the salespeople would, you know, say, oh yeah, I can do this, and oh yeah, I can do that, and then you get it and you're like, I can't really do, you know. So I had not the greatest relationship with salespeople. So when I came into the real estate business full time, I had a little bit of an identity crisis at first. Like, what is it that I'm doing that really adds enough value to the process for me to earn 3% of the sale price? And the reality that I came to learn is that my job is to hold deals together. I'm the glue. Deals fall apart so easily. There's nobody else in the process that's trying to keep the deal together like the way that a real estate agent does, because everybody else in the deal, if you look at it, they're trying to kill the deal. I like to say, and that's a little strong language, but when you think about it, you have an inspector who's trying to find something wrong with the house. You have a title company that's trying to find something wrong with the title. You have the attorney that's trying to find something wrong with the contract. Now you have the inspector who's trying to find, you know, you have, like, everywhere along the process are people trying to find problems. And the only person trying to solve those problems is me and the other agent. Right? So how can you solve problems? Sometimes you throw money at it. Sometimes you come up with a creative solution of, you know, I like to say, if it's not there, it's not broken. Right? So if I get a listing, you know, potential listing, and I'm looking through the house with my seller, and I see something that I know is going to come up on inspection. For instance, the easiest one is there's whole house humidifiers. They're connected to your heating system. They almost never work. Every inspection, I think, like, out of 100, maybe 2 have worked. So I will look inside of that thing, see if it's covered in black mold. If it is, I'll recommend to my seller, you remove this now for $50. Pay a handyman to remove it for $50, or you're going to make a seller's concession at closing for $500. Right? And so if it's not there, it's not broken. There's, you know, nobody goes in and says, oh, I'm not buying that house if it doesn't have a whole house humidifier. But if it's broken and you don't disclose that it's broken, then you're going to end up giving a concession to have it fixed. And
Right.
so that's another area where I try to really guide my clients correctly to help them, have a smoother transaction just by avoiding problems.
Right. So it seems like you're somewhat used to solving problems at that magnitude. What are you focused on now?
What am I focusing on now?
Yeah, from a problem perspective, within the business.
So
Is there anything that
I think I'm not really sure how to answer that question because right now what I'm focusing on is trying to get my system to work much more reliably to find good opportunities.
hmm
And also if I'm meeting with
good
the
property opportunities or buyers?
opportunities for my investors to uh, solve problems for people who have distressed properties, right?
hmm
And then on the flip side, if I meet with a customer who has to sell a house, it's distressed, making sure that my after repair value is accurate, so that they can look at it and say, well, if I fix that for, you know, I don't know, $2,000 to fix that, I'm all of a sudden I can sell my house on the open market and I can get the after repair value instead of the distressed property value.
hmm
So, either way, whether, depending on my client and what their objective is, if it's the seller, obviously it's to get them the highest value for the property. And if it's the buyer, obviously looking for an opportunity to help a seller get rid of a distressed property.
Gotcha. So that would be pretty much a fully realized version of your model, right?
Right.
And would you say that's something that you're focusing on for the next 3 to 5 years to build that out?
Ooh, it better be done before that.
That's too long.
That's too long. Yeah. So I actually think I'll have it done in the next 30 days. There'll always be some fine tuning to it.
Oh, okay.
Um,
That's good.
and um, and then at that point, it may be a matter of whether or not I start to teach other people how to use it through an education program or bring on team members or you know figure out what I want to do
Right.
with it next. Yeah,
So that would be is that exactly what you set out to build
right.
for the structure.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, that was my last question to you, Drew. This was definitely incredible insight, and I thank you for taking your time today to meet with me and to provide insight into your area. Appreciate your time and your openness that you provided to our audience. Is there any additional things that you would like to add?
No, no, I think you hit it. So I appreciate the questioning, and I look forward to seeing the finished product.
Awesome. Me as well. All right. Thank you.